Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this special seminar from the Climate Science Center here at Texas Tech. Thank you for making the effort to come. We have a very good group of people as part of a team to talk to us about the new USDA Climate Science Center hub that's up at El Reno. And as you may know, this was one of 8 regional hubs that the USDA has spun up recently in response to the USGS climate hubs and the federal government trying to deal with climate change despite the Supreme Court ruling today. So I will turn that over to Clay and Sarah Pope, and welcome to this room.
Well, thank you all for allowing us to come down and about the USDA Climate Hub, talk a little bit about what we do, and visit a little bit about some of the things that we're focusing on at the hub. Again, I'm Clay Pope. This is Sarah, my partner in multiple ways. We are contractors. We have an agreement with ARS and NRCS to facilitate the work of the Southern Plains Hub. And we want to talk to you a little bit about, again, about the hub itself and some of the things we do. And, you know, when you think about what the big roles that we have at the Climate Hub, it is communications and outreach. And, you know, that's, we always go out and talk to folks, especially folks outside of academia, outside of government circles. When you're talking to farmers and ranchers, especially, you know, the whole saying that Ronald Reagan had about the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Well, just add to that. You know, the 18 most scary, fearful words is I want to talk to you about climate change, and I'm here to help you. And that can be a challenge, especially in the Southern Plains states of Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. We try to stay out of the politics. We try to stay away from some of the controversial issues, but clearly it is something that we do deal with at times. For those of you who were last night at the speech that we gave at the pub, I do apologize. I did mention that some of the best stories we'd already gone through, but I am going to rehash this a little bit because this is one of the things that we feel like from time to time with USDA talking about climate change, that especially folks out at the USDA service centers feel. And it's a story, I come from a political background, did a lot of work at the Oklahoma State Capitol over the years, and there's a story in political circles in the state about the cow, the bird, and the cat. Now, I would ask if anybody's heard that before, but I see some of you were there last night, so I know you have, but I'm going to rehash it again for your benefit. It's a political story about how, you know, the situation sometimes you have to do things that folks don't necessarily want you to do. You have to tell stuff to them for their own good, even though they don't want to hear it. And the story about the cow, the bird, and the cat is that once upon a time there was this little bird, and it was in a nest, and it was a cold, blustery night. And the wind was blowing, and this little old bird blew out of that nest right down on the ground. And it was cold. Oh, God, it was cold. It started to cry. It cried and cried and cried. Along came this mom cow. Cow saw that little baby bird on the ground, felt sorry for it, turned around, dropped a big old pile of cow manure right on top, walked off. And that cow manure was hot, steamy. That bird's not cold anymore. Oh, it's in a pile of crap. And it started to dry. It cried. Complained. Well, along comes this cat. Cat hears that bird in a pile of manure, digs down, pulls that bird off, cleans it off all nice and neat, and eats it right down. And the moral of the story, and the important thing for those of us who deal with climate change, especially when we're talking with people that don't necessarily want to hear the story sometimes, is that not everybody who puts you in the crap is your enemy. Sometimes you got to tell people something that they don't want to hear. Flip side of that is not everybody who gets you out of the crap is your friend. There's a lot of folks that are willing to tell you what you want to hear, but it's not necessarily the best thing for you. But above all else, and I apologize for my language, but sometimes you got to cuss to really make a story stick. When you're up your nose and shit, keep your mouth shut. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, we don't know all the answers, and we don't know what all is going on. But we do have to be willing to have that communication with agriculture producers and with professionals in the agriculture industry and rural development circles in communities that sometimes they really don't want to hear about climate change. But for their own good and to carry out our responsibility, we need to have that communication with them. And I have found out that what I did.
You just hit quit.
Hit quit?
Yeah.
Hit enter? Accept it. Oh.
Just hit X. There's a mouse. There is a mouse. You can move it. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Because really and truly, we do have to be willing to talk about it because it is a problem. Now, a lot of you have already seen this graph. We're not going to plow over a lot of that ground. we know something is going on. We are seeing an increase in change in climate. We're seeing the increase in temperature, and it is having an effect, not only in production agriculture, but across the board. I like to show this slide. Now, it's a little bit dated. Some of the numbers have changed over time. But if you look at this slide, this shows the movement of cattle herd in the United States. Those red dots indicate 1,000 cattle or more decrease. The blue dots, 1,000 cattle or more increase. I believe it was 2011 was the first year when Nebraska surpassed Texas as the largest cattle feeding state in the nation. We're seeing the cattle herd move north. This isn't because of regulations. This isn't because the government's forcing someone to do something. It's the market and the industry responding to what's happening on the ground, which is changing temperature, the availability of forage, and what we're seeing as far as the ability to produce the food for the feedlots to maintain that level of productivity. We're starting to see that. And that's a challenge, I think, over time. Again, those numbers have changed some because with the rains this spring, we are seeing the cattle herd rebuild some in Oklahoma and Texas. But folks, feedlots that have gone aren't coming back. And I think that's something that we have to consider. We are seeing this on the ground already. This map shows crop insurance costs. The darker the blue, the more being paid out that are going in premiums. And you can look at the Southern Plains of what that means. There's one county in there in Oklahoma, I like to point out, Caddo County, Oklahoma. And I would believe it was 2009, Caddo County had more disasters declared in it than most states in the union, just that one county. Clearly something is going on that's having an impact on our yields, it's having an impact on the industry. And again, it's a reason why we need to be talking about climate change. And you step outside of agriculture, you think about disasters by state from 1950 through 2003. You look how they rank up in the Southern Plains. That does not include the 2015 floods. Clearly, if there's a part of the world that's in the bullseye of climate change, it's Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. And the further south you go, the more challenges you have. That's why we need to talk about this, and that's why we're involved with this at USDA. Now, I'll turn the microphone over to Sarah to talk a little bit about the Secretary of Climate Initiative.
I don't talk nearly as fast as Clay does, so oftentimes when I get up after he speaks, I say, really, my only job is to breathe for him while he's talking, and that's why he brings me along. But today, I am going to talk a little bit about the climate hubs, just because it was an initiative that started out as a press release, and all of a sudden there were magically all of these hubs, and somebody had to figure out what that meant and what they were going to be made into. So this is our mission, and that is to develop and deliver science-based, which is very key, region-specific information and technologies for agricultural and natural resource managers that enable climate-smart decision-making and provide assistance to enable land managers to implement those decisions. One thing that I would point out is that we are in one of the hubs where enabling climate-smart decision-making requires that we have the conversation about climate in the first place, which is often a hurdle that we have to overcome, and is often why we talk about things a little bit differently than they might in the California sub-hub or in the Northwestern hub, and we'll go there. So this gives you an idea of where the hubs are. They did a fairly good job of breaking things up by region, although I've always felt very, very bad for the Southeast hub because I don't know how they make it to all of those states to do what we do. We, on a regular basis, try to make it to each of the states' food and agriculture committee meetings, which is all the USDA agencies. We've tried to make it to most of the agricultural education institutions in the 3 states. And Texas alone is hard enough to cover. I cannot even imagine trying to make everything happen in that region. But these are the hubs. We actually do, and to point out, when it says ARS as the lead, that's the Agricultural Research Service. I claim that my second language is acronyms, and I speak USDA, so I know not everybody else does, but that's what ARS means. So our hub is centered at Fort Reno, which is the ARS facility for the Grazing Lands Research Lab there in El Reno, Oklahoma. It's nice because we can kind of bounce back and forth throughout the region. We do a lot of work both with the Northern Plains and with the Midwest hub, exchanging information, finding ways we can work together. But that gives you an idea kind of the range of states that we're working with. And what we like to say, although this is not our official logo, what we like to say is the hub is the spoke in the middle, and everybody, whether it's an educational institution or a USDA agency or a state agency or individual stakeholders and agricultural producers, each one of those are a spoke. And our job is to, first of all, assemble the wheel, and at some point we're going to get that wheel to start rolling down the road and towards a more stable and climate smart decision-making body as a whole. So back in the beginning of last year, I guess it was about a year ago this time, Secretary Vilsack issued what he calls the, I guess it was in April, the USDA 10 building blocks for climate action. And that, if you would like to follow along, is what is in your fact sheet. I will not stay up there and read it because that would be horribly boring for you all. But to give you an idea kind of where the Secretary and USDA's focus is lying, he outlines these 10 building blocks. And these building blocks essentially have been the roadmap that we have taken to the USDA agencies. And as the hubs, which are still in each of the hub areas, trying to feel their way into what exactly a hub's role is. But this set of building blocks has given us kind of the power to move forward and to talk to the USDA agencies and say, these are the Secretary's priorities, and whether or not you realize it, and Clay made a statement last night about his personal opinion that the most wide-ranging ever piece of climate legislation, and probably for the next 10 to 20 years, climate legislation was the Farm Bill. Because whether they realize it or not, what agriculture does has a huge impact on climate change. And so these building blocks specifically help guide the agency to view what they do on a regular basis in their programming through a different lens and through the climate change lens. So essentially, I can read all of this, you guys can read that if you want. But it uses the authority within the Farm Bill to facilitate the building blocks. Obviously, USDA, there are some regulatory components, but for the most part, we like to focus on voluntary and incentive-based programs and focus on outcomes that have both economic and environmental benefits. It's designed, the programming and these building blocks are designed to meet the needs of the producer. So it's not a roadblock, it's not something that is being thrown to make things more difficult or harder. It is simply a way to help meet their needs in a way that they can start to make those climate smart decisions and prepare for the impacts that we will see down the road. And it's also a way for USDA to assess the progress within the agency right now. Without that lens of climate change, the practices that are undertaken, such as practices in EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, those have multiple what we call bundle benefits. So they have not just an impact on the individual farmer when they convert to no-till, but no-till also produces soil erosion that can have an impact on water quality, that has an impact on air quality or soil erosion, especially in these very windy plains areas when the wind picks up and you've got bare dirt and it starts to blow. That's when the allergies and the asthma. So it has an impact on public health and on health as a whole. So these building blocks allow USDA to start to measure those bundle benefits and see what types of impact agriculture is actually having on climate change. And more than anything, it's to be cooperative and focus focused on building partnerships, and that's the whole point of the hub from the get-go. So, really quick, I'm going to run over the building blocks, which we'll hit on one of them for the most part. But primarily, if you go to, let's see here, it's the back of the second page. There's where the actual building blocks start, and in bold right there with soil health. Obviously, if you're anywhere around NRCS or anywhere around agriculture, soil health is kind of the buzz and cool word and term that we're talking about now, which is amazing. It's great. And we're very excited that that was the first of the building blocks that the Secretary discussed. And it's one of the primary ones. They go on to discuss nitrogen stewardship. That has a lot to do with water quality and managing for nutrients to reduce certain emissions, and also runoff as it relates to water quality. The third is livestock partnerships. So working with the buzzword on this one is anaerobic digesters. They've set goals in here on how many they want over the next 10 years. In our region, this is not going to be one of the ones that we can do as much as they do in California, where they've got a lot more dairies. A lot of the dairies that we had even 10 to 20 years ago are no longer there. But there are some pork producers, smaller dairies. There's a couple of large dairies that will come into play and work through those partnerships, both with the anaerobic digesters and with capital, working to implement BMPs for confined animal feeding operations. The next one is the conservation of sensitive land. So looking at lands that, whether it's highly erodible land, that there's a threat of being taken out of the CRP program, identifying those areas and ensuring that we continue to protect those, and manage them in the best way possible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then all of these, the next one, raising a pasture land also fits in very nicely with the soil health, and doing whatever possible to avoid soil carbon loss and improving the management on their targeted number of acres. The next, let's see here, 4 are in our region. Well, there are plenty of forests. There's lots of forest land. There's not nearly as much as there is in the Northwest, so or other regions, but private forest growth and retention, stewardship of federal forests. I think all of the federal forests, at least in our state, are grassland forests. But still, managing those, promotion of wood products and urban forests are all ones that whenever we have the opportunity, we do whatever we can to facilitate those conversations, but definitely focusing more on the first half. And then energy generation and efficiency. And that's primarily with USDA rural development through their energy conservation and efficiency program, working to identify areas of promotion where we can work with individual producers or work with small communities to increase energy efficiency and cut emissions that way. But the primary thing that is most important about building blocks and about what the hub does and focuses on is to be cooperative and work on a set of voluntary programs and initiatives, because at the end of the day, that is how we found we have the most effective way of building relationships with individual stakeholders, individual agricultural producers, and small town communities. And then they've got the million metric ton avoided emission and sequestration goal that they have set, and Clay can run over the statistic on that one, but essentially, if managed correctly, agriculture has the opportunity to be a net zero carbon, or to be net carbon neutral, essentially. So I already. So, not everyone believes in climate change, obviously. We live in the part of the world where that's a common conversation. But they believe in droughts. And if you can get that conversation started from that point, and you come at it from that direction, then you can start to have a conversation and aim towards the outcomes that you're wanting without having the contentious conversation, and you can start doing something about it, and it leads down the road to prepare and develop systems that are more capable of withstanding those extremes. So I'm going to put it back over to Clay.
Well, and one thing, Sarah was talking a little bit about the droughts. I think one of the things that we need to think about too, when we talk about droughts, we talk about floods, is that when we talk about the focus on soil health as one of the building blocks, that really does get to the heart of one of the big things that we are working on in the Southern Plains. We've got to figure out ways to help production agriculture harden their system to extreme weather events. We've got to be ready to help producers to control erosion, to hold on to soil moisture, to improve pasture conditions, and to help control soil temperature. Now, when you really get right down to the nuts and bolts of it, we want producers to increase organic matter. Now, Sarah talked a little bit about how folks don't believe in droughts or don't believe in climate change, but they might believe in droughts, and they also believe in floods. And when you really talk about what we're trying to do with production agriculture, and this is one of the things that we attempt to do through the Hub and with our other partners at the other USDA agencies, is convey to individuals in production agriculture and with our rural communities what we're really talking about is helping them to deal with extreme weather events. How do you adapt to some of these things? And we talked to the folks with the crystal balls, and they said what climate change really means for our part of the world. It's just that the crazy weather we've always had on the Southern Plains is just going to get a little crazier. The flash flood events are going to be more violent, and they're going to come at a regular interval. What we think about as being the 100-year flood becomes a 50-year flood. The 50-year flood becomes a bad storm every spring. Droughts become longer and hotter. When you think about the droughts, you always hear about. Granddad said we had this really bad drought. We all know the story of the Dust Bowl. We know about the bad droughts in the 1950s. You think about what we just came through with the drought that we've just seen the last few years. And if you think about it from the standpoint of playing the script of climate change, I always like to point out to folks in Oklahoma. In 1938, we had the drought of record for that time in the state of Oklahoma, middle of the Dust Bowl, the Hammond flood. We had the worst drought in state history, the Dust Bowl, in record recorded history, followed by the worst flood in history. 1950s, we had a drought worse than what we had in the 1930s. What stopped it? The record flood at that time for the history of the state of Oklahoma. Now fast forward to where we're at today. We've just come through a drought that, at least in Oklahoma anyway, was worse than anything we saw in the 1930s and 1950s. What broke it? The wettest May ever in the history of the state. The wettest month ever in the history of the state. Not just the wettest May, but the wettest month ever. Now again, I'm not here to say all these events are caused by climate change. If you look at what people say the trends are going to be with our changing climate, it seems to be playing the script. And I think that's something that we have to consider when we talk about hardening our system to make sure that we're ready for these changes that are coming. Now, when we talk, why would producers change what they're doing to try to harden their system? Well, I always kind of like to point out there's three things that make guys change what they're doing. There's money, and well, sometimes there's money. Now, there are other things, of course, but clearly we've got to be concerned about the economic impact that production agriculture is seeing and how, when we help folks make a change, it makes economic sense for them on the ground. But why do producers want to, why would they want to change? Well, producers want to hold on to their land. And this is a neat little fact that I came up with. I had a good friend, and I'm going to refer to this. He pointed out to me at a meeting one time that Iowa loses 2 pounds of corn, or 2 pounds of soil for every pound of corn they produce. And I thought, now in Oklahoma, we've got a lot better erosion rate than they do in the state of Iowa. I'm going to go home and calculate just exactly how much soil we lose for every pound of wheat we produce. Today, we're losing 2.5 pounds of soil for every pound of wheat we produce in the state. And when you think about that, when we're measuring that 8-inch plow cut, that's over 10,000 acres lost to erosion each year in Oklahoma. Now, I haven't calculated for Texas because with the size of the state of the industry, y'all don't have a crop like wheat or corn that I can point to as being the big crop in the state. But I'll guarantee you the erosion rates that we're seeing while we yeoman's work to control soil erosion, we have a lot more to do. And if you think about how we harden our systems when we harden our systems to extreme weather events, soil erosion goes right to the heart of it. And when you're talking to a producer about what would make a change practice, what's land selling for in your area? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I live in the last place in the lower 48 states where they're drilling oil like nobody's business. And because of that, if you look at interest rates, there's a lot of money going into land to sign up. There was a quarter ground the other day, no mineral rights, half of it cultivated, half of it in pasture, decent land, went for over $400,000. You think about that, 160 acres of decent ground in western Oklahoma without mineral rights going for $400,000. Now let's just say it goes back to normal price when the oil price goes down. If you're losing that much land to erosion, why don't you just do yourself a favor? Go down to the bank, pull out your savings, go down the creek, start throwing the dollar bills into it. Because if you're not protecting your soil, that's what you're doing. That is the basis of all of our wealth in production agriculture. And quite frankly, from a societal standpoint, that's the basis of all society, is that kitchen soil. We've got to protect our topsoil. If we're going to sustain food and fiber production for 9 billion people by mid-century, we've got to do it. But more importantly, as an agriculture producer and a landowner, that's the basis of my wealth. That really, when you're talking to a producer, that makes a lot of sense. Producers want to reduce their costs too. That's another reason why producers might change what they're doing. Now, we push no-till quite a bit. In the Southern Plains, less than 20% of our agricultural producers use no-till production systems for producing cultivated crops. Now, according to Oklahoma State University, at least for winter wheat anyway, you use 3 gallons of diesel less per acre per year to grow winter wheat under no-till production than you do under conventional practices. Now, stop and think about that. 3 gallons of diesel less per acre per year. That's savings that goes straight into your pocket. Nitrogen stewardship keeps you from throwing good money away. So we talked a little bit about the building blocks dealing with nitrogen stewardship. And if you don't have a healthy subsoil microbial community, the fertilizer that you're putting down in your production system, again, kind of like going to the bank and throwing those dollar bills away whenever you have soil erosion. Studies from ARS have shown that about 60% of the fertilizer that we put down, if you don't have a healthy subsoil microbial community, is not taken up by the plant. We're basically wasting half the fertilizer that we're putting in the ground. Again, go to the bank, get your money, go in the creek. That's basically what you're doing if you're not taking care of your land. 1% increase in organic matter can make up available up to $700 worth of additional nutrients per acre for growing crops, according to Ohio State. Now, this is Ohio State, and this is one of the challenges that we have in the Southern Plains. So much of this research has been based on things that have been on studies that have been done in places like Ohio, Indiana, North Dakota, a different reality than what we have down here. Well, let's just say, for argument, $100 worth of additional nutrients per acre for growing crops. Let's just say it's nowhere near that efficient down here. I would argue, I think they're onto something, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it's $100. $100 an acre for free fertilizer. Again, that may not make a difference to your farming operation, but I'm guarantee you it does to ours. Where my brother and my nephew farm. Now, producers want to hold on to water too. According to Kansas State University, a 1% increase in organic matter could triple the soil's water holding capacity. Now, again, further north, trying to find out if that reality holds for the rest of the Southern Plains is something that we are working on. But how many of you have seen has NRCS ever seen the rainfall simulator that they take around the countryside to show how different land treatment practices manage? Pretty good anecdotal evidence that the more you can increase your organic matter, the more you can do things to help improve the health of the soil, the more you're going to increase its water holding capacity. I'm from western Oklahoma, I'm not from West Texas. You guys have got the same reality I have where I grew up. A lot more people left this country because it was too dry instead of too wet. My wife's got a lot of family that lives in Oklahoma City, love them to death. I'm a greedy bastard. Every drop of rain that falls on my place, I want to use it before it ever gets to them. If we can increase the water holding capacity in the soil, that's big in this part of the world. Same practices increase organic matter, as I mentioned earlier, reduce erosion. And when you really stop and think about it, these things all kind of tie together. All goes back to the soil. It really does. How we manage our production systems, whether you're talking about cultivated crops or pasture lands, that's really the key to hardening production agriculture to the extremes of climate change. Now, what do we want farmers to do to adapt to climate change? So in talking about that, we want them to harden their system. Well, here's some practices we're kind of looking at right now that we want to do. No-till, plant cover crops, better pasture management, plant grass on highly erodible land. We want to adapt to climate change. We feel like this is a sweet practice. Again, it varies from place to place. Everybody's got realities on their own land. But generally, those are some good practices to look at if you want to adapt to climate change. Now, we also want to mitigate climate change. So what do we want producers to do to mitigate climate change? Well, no-till, plant cover crops, better pasture management, plant grass on highly erodible land. Because when you convert to no-till, remember that 3 gallons of diesel less per acre per year number I showed from Oklahoma State? That means you're burning less diesel. That's less carbon dioxide and nitrogen oxide going into the atmosphere to begin with. So while you're saving money and conserving your soil and helping increase the water storage capacity, you're also putting less greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Talking about cover crops, we all learned in high school biology, plants breathe in on carbon dioxide, breathe out oxygen. That CO2, if you don't disturb the soil, is turned back into organic matter. It's sequestered. We can do things to help mitigate some climate change and root causes of these practices. Now, there's also questions with non-point source pollution and increased stream flow, because water is a huge challenge that we have, whether you're just talking about quantity of water or the fact if you've got a lot of water and you can't drink it because it's polluted, you got the challenge as well. And all of those problems are exacerbated by climate change. What do we want producers to do to address those problems? We start to see a pattern. These things all fit together. And that's the nice thing about what we work with on climate change through the hub and with USDA. A lot of folks like to argue about the issue of climate change, but I'll guarantee you, when you start talking about things about better pasture management, improved soil health, improved nutrient management, there's something for everybody in this. You don't have to believe in climate change to believe in droughts. You have to believe in climate change to believe in floods. You don't have to believe in climate change to want to control soil erosion. You don't have to believe in climate change to improve the health of your pasture and increase the productivity of your land. There's places in here where we can all come around the fire, at least for a little while, and see who can bite off. And I think that's how we really need to be approaching the problem. Now, I've mentioned mitigation. Organic matter, organic carbon. 50%, 50-60% of organic matter is nothing but organic carbon, again, done through photosynthesis. We all learned that in junior high. The plants can breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. No-till can sequester up to 0.5 metric ton of carbon dioxide per acre per year. That's the average number that was used by the Chicago Climate Exchange based on research from Purdue and Kansas State. Planting grass can get you more than that. Now, it's going to vary from place to place, but there are tools like Comet Planner and Comet Farm that are available from NRCS that you can actually calculate what the impact is as far as both carbon sequestration and avoided emissions. Comet Farm is site-specific per farm. Comet Planner gives you a little bit more per county high head cut, but we can get an idea on what we're looking at. Again, no-till uses less fuel, avoid emissions. According to the World Watch Institute, we can reduce current CO2 levels by as much as 25% through improved land use practices. And just this last year, the National Academy of Sciences came out and said if we see a 75% adoption of best management practices, just good conservation practices that help improve the health of the soil, that control erosion, that help increase productivity and reduce costs, if we do those things, Great Plains agriculture could be net carbon neutral. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think that's a conservative estimate. I think it's more like a sink. But that's what they say. I'm going with it. Bottom line is, we can do a hell of a lot to help address climate change just by doing the things that we want to do to help maintain productivity in production agriculture. Now, I wanted to give an example of this. Again, we're from Oklahoma. I'm a little proud of what we do in the state, but there's a lot of good work being done in Texas and Kansas, too. This is just some numbers that we had handy. Oklahoma's taken nearly 50 streams off the 303 dealers. That's EPA's impaired streams list. Number 2 in the nation. Number 1 is Washington, but I will tell you this. Washington focuses on one river system. Oklahoma, I told the group last night, I kind of joked with them a little bit. We're kind of the leftovers. Heck, y'all gave you Panhandle because it put you below the Mason-Dixon line. Half of our state used to be part of Texas. As a Cherokee, I can tell you right now, my people got kicked out of every decent country in the world and every decent state in the union. We ended up in Oklahoma. Because of that, Oklahoma is a very diverse state because it is the pieces of what was left over. More distinct ecoregions than any other state except in California. There's been a stream segment taken off in every one of those ecosystems. Whether you're talking about irrigated crop production in Panhandle, dual-purpose wheat in central Oklahoma, cotton production in southwest Oklahoma, both dryland and irrigated, poultry industry in northeast Oklahoma, or cow-calf operators in southeast Oklahoma. Every one of those sections of the states had one of these streams taken off the 303D list. And tied to that is a carbon sequestration program over 50,000 acres at one time. I don't know if that number that was at the high point. It may have dropped off a little now, but there's been nearly at least 50,000 acres that's been enrolled in the carbon sequestration program that at that time annually was taking around 8,000 cars, the equivalent of 8,000 cars off the road. Now that's done, again, not by regulation, not by somebody forcing them to do anything, just basically capturing what was already being done on the ground. Those agriculture producers went into those programs to help address non-point source pollution through voluntarily, locally led conservation programs that met their needs. All of this I'm talking about is voluntary. Some of it was done through NRCS, some of it was done through the 319 program at EPA. Some of them were water quality initiative watersheds. A lot of them, quite frankly, were just places where NRCS sat down and said, hey, there's a whole lot of practices going on in this area. Guys are converting to no-till, putting in cover crops, doing better pasture management. Maybe we got some active DCs. Let's go out and monitor what the results are. They were able to take those streams off the impaired list because even though those practices weren't targeted for water quality, they had that impact. And now you can go behind and capture what's happening as far as carbon sequestration and avoided emissions. And for fun, you can also see improved wildlife benefits as well. Bottom line is these things all fit together and these programs can work cooperatively. So we have the tools and we have the technology. You know, Sarah referenced it a little bit ago. We have the most extensive climate change piece of legislation that's passed in a generation, quite frankly, will pass for the next 20 years in the form of the Farm Bill. Those people don't think of it that way. But when you think about the things in the conservation title, when you think about the authority of FSA to help producers with loans to be more energy efficient in their operations when they do retrofits, say on grain bins or on storage handling operations or on livestock production facilities, you think of provisions underneath the rural development title, everything from the rural utility service working with electric co-ops to funding water systems in our communities to working on energy efficiency themselves. You go through the research title of the Farm Bill is the most far-reaching and most extensive climate change legislation that's ever passed the United States Congress and signed into law by the President. And it's something that we don't talk about it that way, but that's the truth of the matter. And climate change, quite frankly, is just another natural resource challenge. We've dealt with natural resource challenges before. We can deal with this one too. We've got the tools, but are we using them and thinking about how they tie together? I used that example from Oklahoma about how things can fit together. Are we thinking about how the things that we're doing on the ground are not static in and of themselves? So oftentimes it's so easy to get siloed and say, look, a guy wants to improve pasture management on his land, going to help him do things to improve the health of his pasture, get more pounds of beef. Well, you know what? Depending on how you're doing that, you also may very well be helping sequester more carbon. You also may be probably more well, I'll guarantee you you're doing things to help control erosion, improving water quality, probably helping increase stream flow, and again, probably helping wildlife habitat too. Are we thinking about how those things come together? And when we advise producers, when we talk to landowners, when we talk to our communities, is that weighing into our thinking? And you don't have to come out and say, hey, you got to do something about climate change. But just recognize when you're providing that information to them that it can have an impact, and we can help them to both adapt and mitigate some of these problems while doing the very things that they need to do to deal with the direct problem they're dealing with today. We need to be thinking that way. I put PL 566 up here. A lot of people don't understand that. That's a small upstream flood control program at USDA. I mentioned the flood in Oklahoma in the 1930s in the middle of the Dust Bowl. That's a program that grew out of that flood. Oklahoma and Texas combined have almost 5,000 upstream flood control programs. The few states dominate the nation in the number of these flood control programs because we've got the craziest weather in the country. It is the original weather adaptation program. Are we looking at how we can use that program not just to help control flash floods, but also provide water supplies for our communities? Are we thinking about how that can help provide water for livestock? That's a great example of something outside of soil health that I think, again, we can look at as far as a tool. Sustainability. Everybody talks about sustainability. And all of us involved in production agriculture, you can't pick up Farm Journal or Progressive Farmer, Successful Farming, it seems like, without somebody talking about sustainability. Trick is nobody knows what the hell sustainability means. Kind of like Thurgood Marshall. You know, we know pornography when we see it, but we don't have a definition. And I think that's what we're talking about with sustainability. But if you have a suite of practices on your land that's controlling erosion, that's sequestering carbon, that's reducing emissions, that's improving water quality, that's increasing stream flow, that's helping wildlife habitat, you tell me what's more sustainable than that. And if it's done in a way that meets your economic needs, so you're financially sustainable, you can't beat a deal like that. And we've got to take that approach, and we're going to feed 9 billion people and do it in a way that doesn't destroy our natural resource base and keeps it as a sustainable system moving on in the future. Again, we've got the tools, we've got the technology. And the thing is, we've been this way before. You know, we get so scared about talking about climate change because it has become such a political football and a hot button issue around folks. I contend there's a great analogy in the Dust Bowl in the 1930s to what we're dealing with today. You stop and think about it. People say there's no way we can. I've heard so many times, man does not have the power to affect the climate. We cannot affect nature that way. Folks, the 1930s, we were turning this part of the world into a new Mojave Desert. You thought and think about it. There were storms that were starting in Lubbock, Texas, that were going out 300 miles in the Atlantic Ocean and covering ships with an inch of dust. You know, I like to tell the story about Hugh Hammond Bennett and his testimony before the House, before the Senate Agricultural Committee with the original Soil Conservation Act. In the middle of his speech, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, dust started to fly underneath the windowsills. Street lights came on in D.C. It became as dark at 1 o'clock with me that night at midnight. And he said, "Gentlemen, there goes Oklahoma. That's why we must pass this bill." Next day in Washington Post, FDR said I could run my finger across my desk and hold Oklahoma in my hand. We had a natural resource catastrophe on our hands. Greatest man-made ecological disaster in modern times. We used to call it anyway. Bottom line is, we have been this way before. And I'll pull up the slideshow. We weren't afraid of, we didn't put our head in the sand. We recognized we had a challenge. And we were willing to work with folks to do it in a way that made sense for them. And I like to hold this up here because, you think about how we approached the situation back then. And I love old newsreels. And I wish I could get the animation to work right on the PowerPoint. I'd love to have this picture up there. Hugh Hammond Bennett, when he makes this statement, it's one of those old Republic or Mutual newsreels. He's got his hands on his lapel, the old 1890s style, talking almost. "We Americans have been the greatest destroyers of land of any race, barbaric or civilized." Now, could you imagine a government official today saying something like that? But they were willing to say those things. Now, everybody says, "Now, yeah, that's true," but you had the Dust Bowl. You did have those dust storms that were starting in the southern plains and going out into the Atlantic. You had the street lights coming on in Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York City, front page of the New York Times, about how 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's like 8 o'clock in the evening, because all this dust is blown from the Great Plains. Climate change is a little different. It's a slower, more gradual change. It's not in your face like the Dust Bowl was. But there were folks who had a different view in the 1930s. Folks who were farming out in this part of the world weren't evil. They were just doing the best they knew how to do. And quite frankly, you go back and look, when we settled places like the Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle, when we settled Cheyenne and Arapaho territory in Oklahoma, we thought we found New Garden Eden. We had massive production, and people thought we could build this and turn this into the new economic powerhouse of the United States. One of them was this gentleman, John McCarthy, editor of the Drought, Texas. View the majestic splendor and beauty of one of the great spectaculars of nature, a panhandle dust storm, and smile. Even though we may be choking in our throats and nostrils so laden with dust that we cannot give voice to our feelings, the furies of hell turn loose, but the worst is over. Who said that? 1932. What happened in 1935, April 1st? A little thing called Black Sunday. 3 years later, a dust storm so massive that it took as much dirt, it's estimated, and that one dust storm was moved, and much soil was moved in that one storm as it took to excavate the Panama Canal. Clearly, the worst wasn't over. There were folks, though, who said, "This is just bad drought. Let's just buy our time, it'll rain again, farm the way that we need to farm fence row to fence row because this is the new Eden." There were Dust Bowl deniers, too. Now, credit for Mr. McCarthy. Before it was all said and done, because gentlemen like Hugh Hammond Bennett said, "No, we got to do something different." Guys like Howard Fennell went out there and worked in areas like the Dalhart Dunes. When he saw what was happening on the land, Mr. McCarthy became one of the biggest advocates of soil conservation in the United States. Changed his tune because people were willing to go, and like I said, that cow, bird, and cat story, willing to tell somebody, folks, that didn't something they didn't necessarily wanted to hear, but they needed to hear. And because of that, we were able to turn back that tide of dust and really ensure that this part of the world could be a major player in producing food and fiber for future generations and help feed the global world. We dealt with the Dust Bowl through that approach. We can deal with climate change the same way. And at the end of the day, let's just say it, folks. Let's just say it's one big house. I actually borrowed this from Captain over there. Let's just say that we do these things: energy independence, preserve rainforest, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean water, clean air, control soil erosion, reduce input costs, increase profitability for production agriculture, have more efficient utilization of fertilizer, increase in water soil holding capacity. Let's just say we do all those things, and climate change is a big hoax. Now name off one of them things we shouldn't be doing anymore. Not only for the good of mankind. Again, like I said, I'm a greedy bastard. From a producer standpoint, what do we need to be doing to help ourselves and maintain our own operation? These things do go hand in hand, and it doesn't need to be a big fight. With that, thank you all for letting us come out here today. Well, Sarah's here to answer any questions you might have. And so with that, we take any questions you might have. Yeah.
What resistance do you get?
You know, in all honesty, it's there's the biggest challenges you have with no-till are threefold. One is the cost of conversion to equipment, especially in winter wheat areas. You know, you stop and think about how much money it takes to purchase a no-till drill and purchase a sprayer. Just the investment alone. I mean, when you're kind of farming in a marginal area anyway, there's a little hesitant to make that investment if you're already set up for something else. And kind of going hand in glove with that at the age of a producer. I mentioned I farmed with my brother and my nephew. This time last year, I was going with my father, brother, and nephew. My dad passed away in February year ago, this time of year. And we converted to no-till, I guess, about 15 years ago. And Dad always said, he said, you know, you boys want to farm. And because you want to farm, we're going to make the investment. Our equipment was wore out anyway. We needed to make a change. But he said, look, if I was doing it myself, I'm going to be alive maybe another 20 years if I'm lucky. I can get along with what I got. But you boys want to stay in operation, so I'll make a change. Age of producer is a big challenge. Culture. You know, you stop and think about it. Dad, till the day he died, the believer knows it. He really was. He bought in on the program. He encouraged us to start doing cover crops. He really got involved in it. But to the day he died, you drive down the road, you'd see our wheat field over here, and you'd see our neighbors, and he'd look at that fresh and proud ground, and he said, Dad, just look at that. That's the way it ought to be. And it's a cultural impact. And then the other thing is it's new to, it's new to this part of the world. It's not new, but it is new because we are talking a lot of times about virgin territory, and so much of the research that's been done on cover crops and what you rotate into is more geared for the upper Midwest. And I think that's one of our challenges in the Southern Plains. And quite frankly, I think, especially in winter wheat country, if you're going to make no-till and cover crops work, you've got to incorporate livestock because so much of that wheat is dual-purpose wheat anyway. The upper Midwest, that's not something that's widespread in the use of livestock in grazing cover crops. I think if it's going to work in this part of the world, that's got to be part of the mix. And quite frankly, the research hasn't been done. So those are some of the challenges that are out there. Do you have anything to add to that?
I would say the biggest challenge is that the focus and conversation, whether it's a coffee shop or just in general, meetings, is the focus is so much on yield and not on profit margin that when they call it the 3-year hump that you have to get over with no-till, you're seeing a drop in yield, but you're also seeing a huge reduction in your input costs. So shifting that conversation it's extremely difficult. Like I said last day, money is kind of one of those things that you're not supposed to talk about. And so to go in and be able to showboat with how much your yield was at the coffee shop is one thing. It's a totally awkward conversation to go out and say, well, how much did you profit this year? So I think that's another, and also getting that data is extremely difficult. So getting that picture and being able to paint that for the producer and make that case is kind of the biggest struggle that we have, and that's the biggest gap that we have right now is being able to make the case on the economic end because that gap is there.
So they're just looking for the yield is a quick number that
Right.
comparative is a bragging rights a little bit. That's just the thing. That's fine.
They equate yield to profit, and it's different. So next.
I'm doing work right now with grading agencies and foundations, water scarcity on the South Plains, precipitated agricultural waters, discussing problem of water scarcity, the reality of water scarcity, and how all these other factors come into play. Not only the culture, but I talk about early yield, not just the long-standing traditions you have with the families growing up outside. All that said, that's the kind of work that I'm doing specifically is trying to gather from these agricultural water issues. What are the complex topics? What are the things that are these indicators? Not just behavior, things that can change so don't forget that knowledge practice. My question after this presentation, I appreciate it. What can I do for you? And maybe more importantly, because I'm a great bastard as well, what can you do for me? As a person who's out on the road, collecting this data, running up bills,
I think we need to talk. As Sarah said with that, we kind of view the hub, like I said, we're kind of the table. Everybody's got a piece of the puzzle as far as the picture of climate change. Our role is to help everybody bring those pieces together and then see what the heck it looks like, see where we've got holes, we've got to do research on. let's visit after this and let's talk a little bit, because I think we deal with a lot of folks, not just here in Texas, but in Kansas and Oklahoma too, that are, we're a facilitator, we bring folks together. We need to stay on top. I think there's, we'd love to have a chance to visit with you and see if there's a way we can help you partner up with some of the folks that we're working with to try to help them accomplish those goals, because that's right, that's what we're talking about.
And providing information too is one of the goals of the hub. So as your research progresses and start to put those things together, being able to share that, and whether it's on the website or whether it's with the other researchers that we work with, and how we incorporate that and moving forward, that's how you can help us. But definitely, let's talk afterwards.
Yeah. Is it possible, or would you know what you're working on, how 10 years from now, that we do some assessment on implementation of BMPs has resulted in some abatement of change, adaptation? How can we see that? How can we assess our success? So,
Go ahead.
Okay, so the building blocks are the first step in setting up the, at least USDA's ability to do that. The key, and we actually within the hub have worked on a project that specifically will do that, in working with, and whether it's working with the watershed or working with USDA's NRCS to look at the implementation of their conservation BMPs, and using tools like the Comet Planner. And essentially, it's just a matter of going in and crunching the numbers. So taking, on a county basis, how many individual producers converted to no-till, taking those numbers, the number of acres, and transplanting them into this Comet Planner, and getting it to spit out that data that says this is what the impact is. That's the long-term goal for USDA, though, because with the agreement that was signed with China and the new climate change agreement in Paris, USDA, while it hasn't been issued a mandatory direction, they're going to have to show exactly what you're saying. They're going to have to show what type of net benefit has been realized. And I think they right now are just trying to piece the puzzle together as to how they collect that data in a privacy sensitive way, but at the same time in an accurate way with verification.
And that is one of the things that we are working on in our part of the world, especially in the Southern Plains. In fact, I've got some of the watersheds. Now, the challenge gets into is a lot of your watershed management done by state agencies, and not every state runs things the same way. But trying to identify those areas where we have significant investment, I mentioned the 303 list, following behind where NRCS and to a lesser extent EPA, the State Conservation Agency, have made an investment in conservation practices, using tools like Sarah said, Comet Pond and Comet Planner, to come up with what carbon sequestration and avoided emissions value is of those practices, and cobble up that number. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there's tons of sort of carbon sequestration and reduction in emissions that's going on in the United States right now that agriculture producers are doing, but it's not called that. Every time a guy uses quit for CSP to convert to no-till, he's increasing carbon sequestration and avoiding emissions. We're just not calculating that. And those are the kind of things that they, and then looking at what the overall impact is of what you're looking at 10 years from now, I think that's just trying to get our overall complement of greenhouse gas emissions down, and having that, like Sarah said, as part of the overall larger government nationwide of what we're trying to do in the situation.
Well, it might be taboo, but if you were to implement a program, not necessarily that have to have trade, but if there was some type of climate change legislation that turned carbon into a commodity, essentially, then I guarantee you would have that data a lot quicker than we will kind of the routes we have to go right now. But I think that finding a way to incentivize producers to provide that information, and not only provide the information, but to be able to verify that, that it's taking place, with, the BMPs are remaining in place is important as well. So there are mechanisms to do it, but right now, I think people work with what we've got.
And I think a lot of it too is trying, like I said, trying to collect that, as Sarah said, and you see already on some of the issues of climate change exacerbates water quality in front. There's some great examples of that, you know, ongoing implementation basis that you can get solid numbers on that. I think that's a trick, is building that same kind of